Welcome to In the Green Chair, an interview podcast series for people looking to begin or expand their career in the green economy. I'm your host, Anna Garza, and today's guest in the Green Chair is sustainable economist and founder of Good Investing, Tim Nash.
Choosing where I spend my money, and more importantly in my mind, choosing where I invest my money, especially over the long term, I think has such a profound impact. And that really, to me, it is about sort of investing in the world you want to retire into.
On this episode, we talk about what sustainable investing is and why you should start investing early. Welcome to the Green Chair, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here.
Tim, you have quite a career background. You're an expert on socially responsible investing, impact investing, and the green economy. You have been featured on CBC's The National, on the Globe and Mail, and even spoke to Kevin O'Leary on the topic. You have spread the word that, hey, sustainable investing exists, and it's also something that's viable. What was that aha moment for you that motivated you to pursue a career path focused on sustainable economics?
So I did my undergrad in economics and philosophy. As I was learning economics, I always had this instinct that something was missing. I describe it as sort of my spidey sense was tingling. I knew something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And when I went to New Zealand in my third year of university, I did an exchange and I went to New Zealand, and that's where I took a course in triple bottom line economics. And so that's this idea of people, planet, and profit. And really, it just absolutely opened up my mind, realized that that is what had been missing, that the economic system had been completely ignoring social and environmental issues, looking only at profit. And that's what really started me on this journey. From there, bunch of different sort of smaller experiences that kind of confirmed that I was on the right path. But when I graduated with my BA in economics, I had way more questions than I had answers. So that's when I went to Sweden and I did my master's in sustainability. I learned from people from all over the world. It was an interdisciplinary program, as well as international. And that's when I started to understand the gaps in our economic system a little bit more clearly. And for my thesis topic, I looked at this idea of socially responsible investing. And right away, people assumed lower financial returns. It was sort of like, oh, that's cute. You want to save the world. Well, I'm in this to make money. But what I found was that there's a business case for sustainability, and that actually sustainable companies do just as well, if not a little bit better financially than their unsustainable peers. And so that's what really kind of propelled me, as I saw this gap where people had this view that sustainable investments were going to underperform, whereas really everything I was learning about sustainability is that, hey, this is the future, and that the returns can be just as good, if not a little bit better. And that's when I really came back to Canada and started my first business and kind of went on this mission to educate people about how they can align their portfolio with their values and actually make money doing it.
I know that many people assume that sustainable investing underperforms compared to regular investing. So how do you tackle, in the work that you do now, those strong held beliefs that still carry on now that sustainable investing underperforms, or other misconceptions? And why do you believe that it doesn't underperform?
Right. Well, I mean, the data is on my side. So if I look at the last 10 years, all of these socially responsible, and we often use the term ESG, environmental social governance. So these different ESG funds have all done just as well, if not a little bit better than their benchmarks. So really, I don't have to, this isn't my belief, this is just my experience, lived experience over the last 10 years. I can put up charts and graphs to show that this is the case. But coming back to your question about why that mindset exists, I think there's just been this psychology. I think it started probably back in the 1990s when a lot of sort of organic or fair trade or sort of these eco products started to come on the market. And a lot of them weren't as good as the regular ones out of the gate, like the first iteration, right? So you would try sort of like an organic shampoo, or you would, organic food was so much more expensive. And so, really, I think that cemented that idea for a lot of people that somehow you had to sacrifice performance in order to go for the greener option. But, obviously these things improve, and that now, we have so much more competition in the market that these products are just as good. And then when it comes to investments, it's really this notion, I think there's a dominant worldview that in order to make the most money, you have to rob and cheat and steal and exploit people and exploit the planet, and that's like the smart financial thing to do. When really, my perspective is that if we're looking at this over a long period of time, really it's about trust. It's about loyalty. And by treating people right and by treating the planet right, there are all of these opportunities to become more efficient, right? Use less energy and water and materials, to be more productive, to have people actually working harder for you, and those employees sticking around longer because they believe in the company that you're building. Those factors, those sort of positive aspects to sustainability far outweigh a lot of the costs that are associated with this.
Definitely, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And I know you mentioned a few times now ESG, or environment, social, and governance factors. For some of our listeners who may not know what that is, could you briefly explain those factors?
Totally. So ESG is the investment industry word for sustainability. 15 years ago, when I was still doing my undergrad, really investment analysts would only look at financial factors. Now we have a lot more information. And so we have this ESG data available, which means that when we're assessing a company, we can look at their environmental performance, things like carbon emissions, or how much water they're using, how much pollution they're creating. The social factors, which are really about how they treat their employees. Are their employees unionized? Are they being paid a fair wage? And then also the governance issues. So this is going to be how the company is run. So things like the independence of the board of directors. So some companies, the CEO is also the chair of the board of directors. But the board of directors, like, their job is to hire and fire the CEO. So you don't want that overlap. It would be much better if they were independent. But also looking at things like diversity, gender diversity on the board of directors, age diversity, really understanding that if you have proper governance systems in place, that signals a much better run company. So again, whereas before, what I grew up in, the schooling that I was taught in economics was that all of these social and environmental factors are externalities, that they're external to the profit maximizing equation. Whereas now with this ESG data and information, we're starting to see that, hey, there's a carbon tax. If a company is producing carbon emissions, that's more expensive for them. Right? That if they're not treating their employees well, or let's say there's a product recall because they didn't have proper safety measures in place and now they have to recall all of these products, that's a huge cost and expense. That these risks are the term we use is financially material, that they're not external, they're actually very relevant to how profitable a company can be. So this industry, the financial industry is going through a huge evolution right now. When I started my business 10, 12 years ago, no one knew what the heck I was talking about. And now this acronym ESG is on everyone's mouths. If you watch CNBC or BNN, even these very standard old school investment reporters now at least understand that this is a thing that they have to think about.
Following on that last point that you made, that a few years ago, nobody really wanted to talk about this or really get their foot in the door. As someone who works in finance, and did it feel risky to work as an entrepreneur in sustainable finance back then and even in some cases now?
Oh yeah. I mean, when I first started, it was tough. And I'm pretty lucky, I have a lot of privilege in my life that I was able to graduate from my undergrad debt-free. And as well, I was able to live with my parents and stay, rent-free for the first part of my career. And definitely it was risky. I mean, I was young, I was out of school, I was talking about things that people really didn't understand at that time. And I had to do a lot of education that most people had never heard, the terms responsible investing or sustainable investing. And so it takes a lot of time and energy and effort to educate the market. Right? So that was really my focus for a long time. And I had to have side hustles. I got a job teaching economics at Sheridan College. So I taught intro to micro, intro to macro economics to sort of help me pay the bills, while I very slowly and gradually grew my business and developed my networks and listened to the market, understood where the gaps were and what people were willing to pay for. And through a period of years, in this trial and error, I was able to land on a business model that really worked, that brought value to people, and that people were actually searching out. And then over the last, I'd say 2 years, there's this surge in interest in sustainable investing that now people are Googling these terms and everyone's talking about it and people have lots of questions. And so now, all that work I did has paid off. That now I'm someone who's been in this industry for over a decade and have had all of this wonderful experience, which now is so much more valuable than it was when I first started.
Why do you think that surge is happening now?
Oof. So a couple things. I think when I graduated from my master's degree, it was 2008, came back to Canada ready to take the investment world by storm. Now in October of 2008, we had a major market crash. And this was the worst crash since the Great Depression. And it sucked for me trying to find a job in that environment. And that really, sustainability got thrown on the back burner. If you remember back then, it was all about fixing the economy. Whereas about 2 years ago now, we had the COVID crash that in March of 2020, we had a global health crisis that sent the stock market plummeting. But for whatever reason, this time around, sustainability is on the front burner, that it is now embedded in all of our conversations about the economic recovery. So part of it is going to be about government action, that government cares about this stuff. Part of it is about consumers, that consumers care about this stuff. And part of it is about investors, that this whole ESG movement has now taken root, that investors are even asking these sorts of questions. So it's really coming from a whole bunch of different angles, but it's so clear to me this difference between the crash and subsequent recovery from 2008, where that really was a financial crash and a financial recovery, versus into 2020, where it really was a human issue. It was a health crisis, and that the recovery is now led by human issues and environmental issues.
Yeah, there's a big movement and a lot of social changes as we've seen these past 2 years. And among those changes, studies have shown that younger generations, millennials, Gen Zs, are saving more and have their eye on investing more. But they are still quite nervous and unsure about how to get started. You told me that something every youth should start doing is to start investing as soon as possible because of this idea of compound growth. It's not about how much you invest, but rather how soon. How can someone follow this advice and on investing early and not do it wrong?
Yeah, I mean, it really is such an important thing for young people to think about. I want to acknowledge that when it comes to investments and finances, most of us don't really think about it. Most people really, they come out of school and they get their first job and they pay off their student loans and they now have money and they have no idea what to do with it. And they end up just like kind of blindly walking into a bank and getting sold a product and they don't really know what's in there and they end up paying really high fees when there's no need to do that. Now's the time to learn a little bit, to kind of wrap your head around it, to read some blogs. I've got an online course that I offer for people who are just getting started, right? And it's really this introduction to investing. This is probably the biggest financial decision you make, your investment choices and buying a house. Like those are really the two major choices that most people face in their life. So when you're making these decisions, like ask some questions, dig into it a little bit, but don't procrastinate. Don't spend all your time learning and no time doing. That investing to me should be done through experiential learning. And it's going to put you so much further ahead. I deal with a lot of clients who are in their 30s or even 40s who are just starting their investment journey now. And it's tricky because they feel like they're behind. And so they feel like they're playing catch up and they feel like they have to take more risk than really they ought to be taking. And so really by starting doing this as early as you can, and even if it's putting aside, $100 a month, like you said, compound growth, it's a beautiful thing for people, that it doesn't matter how much you invest, it matters how early you start investing. So the easiest thing for a young Canadian to do is to open up a TFSA, a tax-free savings account. with an online broker. And so this is an online brokerage. There are a bunch of them. Every bank has them, but there are also some like Wealthsimple or Questrade that are a little bit more independent. What you want to do is you want to come up with an investment plan. And an investment plan is basically like a pie chart. And in that pie chart, you're going to have a mix of both stocks and bonds. So you're going to want to learn about the difference between stocks and bonds. And that I would suggest people learn about these things called ETFs, exchange traded funds. And these are funds that are bundles with lots and lots of companies inside of them, but they're traded directly on the stock market, meaning that you can buy them through your online brokerage and the fees are much, much lower than mutual funds. And really what you want to do is come up with a plan, which is that pie chart, and then just stick to the plan. If the market goes up, you stick to the plan. If the market goes down, you stick to the plan. And then obviously my perspective is that you want to then layer on this lens of sustainability to say, okay, well, what companies are inside these funds? And can I choose funds that exclude things I want to get rid of? Fossil fuels, like I don't want any oil companies or pipelines in there at all. And then maybe you can carve out part of your pie chart for, things that are a little bit doing more good, things like renewable energy. I think that another problem that a lot of youth are facing right now is that their first experience with investing is often around more things that are more speculative, more like gambling. So whether it's cryptocurrency or whether it's like weed stocks or, what is it, GameStop, this whole thing that took off earlier this year, that really, I think a lot of people are approaching it with more of a gambling mindset, get rich quick. And that's just totally the wrong mindset. People are learning a lot of really bad habits, and some people have made money doing it, but a lot of people are now sort of chasing those returns and kind of doing it out of FOMO, and that's the worst thing you can be doing.
Yeah, you gotta enter with an open mind and not be afraid to make risks. Really use the time that you have to your advantage if you start off early. And you said the magic word or keyword a while ago, cryptocurrencies. That's a big topic right now. I wanted to ask you, what role does sustainable investment play with the rise in cryptocurrencies? Is there such thing as sustainable investment with it?
Yes and no. This is a really tricky thing because the crypto space is giant and I'm not an expert in that world. And so there are some really, really cool things happening. And I do see a very strong role for blockchain technology in creating a more sustainable economy, specifically when we start thinking about tracing through these global supply chains, right? Like, how do I know that my chocolate is actually fair trade? Right now, I'm kind of trusting this certification process, but what if it was on the blockchain and I could like trace it back and like see the farmer that my chocolate came from? Like, that would be super cool. That said, with cryptocurrencies right now, I think there is a bit of a gambling psychology, that there is a lot of what we call speculation in the market, where people aren't really looking at it and is this a worthwhile investment or is this having a positive impact on the world? It's really about, is the price going to go up? But it tends to be this psychology of greed that is really driving a lot of people to get into the crypto space. So, my advice is like it with anything else. Know what you're buying, understand it, ask questions, do homework. Like if you're going to, I'm not saying don't invest, right? You can do it, but just go in with eyes wide open and understand that these things do have an environmental impact. Mining Bitcoin is very, very energy intensive. And the way it's done right now is just having a really, really bad impact on CO2 emissions. Now, there are some cool innovations coming up to be able to, for example, using the heat from these mining rigs to be able to heat homes and neighborhoods and things like that. But it's really interesting what's happening with Ethereum, which is another cryptocurrency, where they're moving from something called proof of work, which is very energy intensive mining, to something called proof of stake, which is going to reduce the amount of energy required by, I think it's like 98, 99%. This my way of saying is that it's not a black or white issue. It's not like crypto is sustainable or it's not sustainable. But like with anything else, know what you're doing. And if your primary goal for doing it is based in this idea of kind of greed, like get rich quick, just understand that there is a lot of risk in that.
Really educating yourself, I think that's the key, and getting accustomed to the different resources out there and becoming financially literate. So would you say it's a good idea to incorporate the ESG factor knowledge after and first be financially literate, or vice versa?
So my advice would be to start on the more traditional financial lens. You can read books like The Wealthy Barber is a great place to start. Or, there's a really cool website called the Canadian Couch Potato. Or, start to look at some of the resources I've got up on my website. You need to kind of have like a benchmark or an anchor on your psychology. And that we often have that benchmark, it's very traditional. And then what I can do is compare the sustainable investment to that benchmark to understand, okay, are the returns higher or lower? Okay, are the fees higher or lower? Is the volatility, like the ups and downs, is that higher or lower than the benchmark? But if you don't have that benchmark, it becomes really hard to compare anything, right? But really those things are only gonna click once you have a little bit of a traditional financial knowledge.
Incorporating the sustainability factors may just be the more natural route once you know the basics. However, I want to go back to ESG factors. And
Sure.
The credibility of these ESG factors have also been questioned since some big companies such as Facebook, Coca-Cola, Nestle, Amazon score relatively high on some ESG scorecards, but their product outcomes can have had some negative mental health impacts among users or negative employee morale, among other factors. What advice would you give to someone wanting to invest sustainably while navigating through conflicting ESG data and information?
Now, when it comes to ESG data, this is a problem that comes up often, that it's not standardized. And to me, that's a good thing because I like diversity of perspectives. So for me, I can dig a little deeper and I don't just take the headline score. I want to understand, why does it have that score? What does that mean? And that, I want to be clear that ESG and this whole lens, like, it's really not perfect. All we're trying to do is to make informed, educated decisions that are moving us in the right direction. But it's also not a black and white issue. It's not that a company either is ESG or it's not. It is complicated. There's a lot of work to be done in this space. There are a lot of job opportunities and research opportunities. If your listeners want to do a master's thesis or a PhD thesis, there is a very, very fertile ground in this ESG space to be able to come up with new ideas, new perspectives, new ways of doing it. So I'm not trying to be absolutely perfect when it comes to my investment portfolio. I'm just trying to do the best that I can given the options that are available right now. And that, fingers crossed that just like we've seen this huge boost over the last couple of years, that in the coming years, that momentum is just going to continue and there are going to be better options and there's going to be even more, opportunities for people to do even more good.
As you said, there's so many new opportunities for research out there and even for careers in the sustainability field. What do you think are the benefits of pursuing a job in finance?
Well, typically you get paid a little bit better than in a lot of other sustainability sectors. In my mind, the sort of best entrepreneurial path is to find a problem that you have that other people are having, come up with a creative solution to solve it, and all of a sudden, boom, now you're in business. So that applies to finance, but it also applies to, so many other areas of the economy. But it really starts with like what sparks your passion and interest, because if you can figure that out, then it just makes going through that learning process and that trial and error, so much more fun and easy because you care about it.
We'll be right back. This interview series is part of the Green Collar Careers program, brought to you by Relay Education. Relay is a Canadian charity that delivers renewable energy, environmental education, and green careers programs for youth. Remember to check out our website, relayeducation.com, and social media channels at Relay Education to find out when our next interview will be posted and to find resources on how to start your green career. Tim, you've worked as an instructor, researcher, blogger, and entrepreneur. So many different career paths. What are some skills that you have relied on that have given you that career flexibility?
The word that comes to mind is really this idea of perseverance, of grit. To me, it was always about a vision, so a long-term vision of what it is that I want to do in this world. And then from there, community. That I got space at a place called the Center for Social Innovation. And this is a co-working space in Toronto full of actors and activists and nonprofits and for-profits and co-ops and amazing change makers that are really having an impact in the world. And so finding a community that believed in me and that wanted me to succeed, and then having the sort of grit to keep going even through those tough days. And then, from there, I would just say patience. That it did take the better part of a decade for people to really understand what the heck I was even talking about. And so, I think sometimes people do have a vision for what the world can be, but not everyone else sees that vision. And sometimes you just need the patience to wait for the rest of the world to catch up to where you're at.
You need that grit and determination when you're just starting out. You have entering the workforce is difficult, especially during COVID. And what do you believe is the major issue in employment within your field?
I mean, I think that when I started, there weren't any jobs. So that was the hard part. And then when I found a job and applied for the job, the feedback I always got was that I was too passionate about sustainability because they were worried that the company wouldn't move fast enough for me. Right. And so if I wanted, because I was a change maker, I wanted to see things, sort of radically different. And I think a lot of my potential employers were worried that if their company didn't move fast enough for me, that I would get upset and move on. So, I think to me, it really is just about an alignment of impact and of expectations. That's really the biggest gap. And so to me, I see too many young people coming out of school thinking that a job is going to sort of fall in their lap or that a job will find them. Whereas my advice always is to do the work of visioning and imagine your dream job and then go out there and create it. And even if it doesn't exist yet, know that that's okay, that you can, sort of steps in the right direction. So, my dream, my big vision, my big, hairy, audacious goal is that when I'm an old man, I'm going to win the Nobel Prize in economics. That was sort of always my vision. And I have some ideas for how I'm going to do that, but that was as big as I could possibly dream. And so every opportunity that I was looking for were things that, number one, would move me in the right direction. That number two, had a good return on investment, they would pay me well for the amount of time and energy I'm putting into it. And number three, that was a flexible platform, that it wasn't a dead end, right? But it's something that I could always build off of. So for me, teaching intro to micro, intro to macro, that was a very clear path for me. And that it wasn't that I waited for job postings and, tried to apply to be an economics instructor. No. I identified the colleges within my radius that I wanted to work for. And I said, okay, do I have relationships? And I reached out and I set up a meeting with the dean of the business school to do this, to understand what are the qualifications. And then, it took 6 months, 8 months before it was really that my name was on a list. So, but that was my opportunity. And I really feel that I did create that opportunity for myself. So, this is the power of knowing what it is you want to do, of following that spark, understanding the vision. But again, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You're not going to get your dream job right out of school. Instead, find a job that maybe isn't perfect, but that pays the bills and teaches you the skills. I learned how to be a better public speaker. I got so many hours of practice lecturing, talking about economics in front of a class of students. That is such valuable experience for me. And definitely, if I think that, okay, one day I'm going to win the Nobel Prize in economics, that's an academic thing. And then as my business grew, I was able to dial back my hours teaching until I was making so much money with my own business that I was able to, walk away from that teaching gig.
I think a lot of young people really need to get away from the idea of finding yourself versus actually just creating yourself in the life that you want to live. The economy is uncertain, and we forget that how we spend and invest our money holds a great deal of power. How can people feel empowered by the investments or the choices they make financially?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always hard to see it as an individual, right? That like, oh, how does my little tax-free savings account really matter in a $1 trillion, investment market? Or why does it matter what coffee I drink when, there are millions of people drinking coffee every day? But really the beautiful thing about economics is this analogy of the invisible hand of the market. So this is an old saying by Adam Smith. And it's really that it is all of these small little choices added together that really drive and push the economy in certain directions. So people have more power than they realize when it comes to this stuff, but obviously can't be done in isolation. That we need to be talking about it and, sharing our strategies and our approaches with other people. And that if we collectively as a society decide to invest in certain things over others or to buy certain things over others, then that has a huge impact on the global financial system. So, it's one of these things where, it's understanding that we are part of a system and there are systemic issues and inequalities, right, that exist that, we just kind of have to, they're there and there's not too much I can do about it. I have to live within that. At the same time, every single day I wake up, I'm participating in this economy, choosing where I spend my money, and more importantly, in my mind, choosing where I invest my money, especially over the long term, I think has such a profound impact. And that really, to me, it is about sort of investing in the world you want to retire into. That, that again, so many people just invest blindly. And that means that they're just letting other people decide what the economy is going to look like when they retire. Understanding that like it might not seem like it has a huge impact, moving the needle right now today. But if I make this a habit and that's just what I do day in, day out, and if other people start to do it as well, then that's really when we start to see the needle move.
It adds up, I think, all these habits and your investment and your consumer choices in the long run. What excites you about the future of sustainable investing?
I mean, it's so wide open right now. There's so much possibility. And to me, what's exciting is just the momentum, right? That really, Anna, like when I started doing this, no one knew what I was talking about. People thought I was nuts. Like my uncle at the holiday dinner table is just like, what? Like sustainable investing? Like you got to be kidding me. Like those two words don't belong together, right? And now it's just going mainstream. Like I turn on the financial channel and people are talking about this. Now, there's still a lot of education that I think a lot of people are talking about it and they don't necessarily know really what they're talking about. So I think there's still a long way to go. But to me, it's just understanding this acknowledgement that the economy is about more than just money, that it is about people, that it is about the planet, that these things matter and that they have an impact on our economy and that our economy has an impact on those things, that it's all interconnected. And so to me, the coolest things that I love is this idea of impact investing. So rather than investing in the stock market or the bond market, with big companies, this idea of impact investing is things like community bonds or green bonds, where we're often investing in sort of local co-ops or nonprofits. And there's another word that I absolutely love, which is called biomimicry. And this is where certain companies are mimicking nature to solve technical challenges. And that to me, there is just so much opportunity for innovation and creative problem solving by looking at nature to be able to help us solve so many of these problems. To me, I just want an economy that runs more like an ecosystem. The old analogy is that the economy should be a well-oiled machine, but like machines, that's so old school. I don't want a machine. I don't want like this dirty, oily, crusty machine. Like, no, I don't want that. I want an ecosystem where, stocks and flows and inputs and outputs, where things live in balance and in harmony, where we have diversity.
Our economy is a subsystem of our biological ecosystem. Economics is becoming a very interdisciplinary field, right? You need economists to be able to read climate science and interpret that and translate it in economic terms. Tim, we learned some great insights today, not only about your career path, but also about sustainable investment and how youth can jump in on that opportunity. Is there anything else that you would like to leave our listeners with, and how can people connect with you and find out more about the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, the best places to connect with me are on Twitter. I'm at Tim Nash, CFP. I've got my podcast with the Toronto Star. So if people can search for it on Apple and Spotify and Google Podcasts and wherever they're listening to this podcast, they should be able to find Responsible Investing for a Sustainable Economy. And I do have a little offer for listeners, because these are like what you're doing, Anna. You're exactly the type of person that I want to be helping. And so I did build an online course for people who are just getting started. And so I've set up a discount code. So people who listen to this podcast can use the discount code RELAY25. So it's all caps, RELAY25. And basically, you'll get a 25% discount on my online course. So if you go to goodinvesting.com, which is my website, and you can click on the little online course button and sort of follow through there, and you can use that coupon code to get a 25% discount.
Thank you so much, Tim. I think the course is the perfect tangible outcome for our listeners who have listened to today's episode. Thanks for sitting down with us in the Green Chair today. Once again, I'm your host, Anna Garza, and stay tuned for our next episode to learn more about the different paths people take to working in the green economy.